Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, friendships are rarer than mercy itself. The galaxy of Warhammer 40,000 is a place where every species fights tooth and nail for survival, where alliances are temporary at best and betrayal is expected, where the very concept of peace exists only as a distant memory from a time before recorded history. Yet within this endless conflict, within this cosmos of calculated genocide and existential warfare, sometimes the most fascinating stories emerge from the most unlikely places. Sometimes, in the vast darkness between the stars, connections form that should be impossible by every law of nature and logic. Sometimes, an orc and a Necron might become something that, against all reason, resembles friends. This is a tale that defies the fundamental rules of the 41st millennium. It contradicts everything we know about these two ancient species. The orcs, those green-skinned warriors who live for battle and know nothing but violence and conquest, who see the universe as one giant arena for endless warfare. The Necrons, those ancient machines of living metal who have transcended flesh only to lose their souls in the process, who view organic life as beneath contempt and see the galaxy as rightfully theirs to reclaim. These two races should never, under any circumstance, find common ground. They should never share a moment of understanding. They should never, ever become allies, let alone friends. And yet, in the twisted logic of Warhammer 40,000, where belief can shape reality and madness might be the only sane response to an insane universe, such impossibilities become worth exploring. The story we're about to unfold exists in that strange space between canon and speculation, between documented history and fan theory, between what is and what could be. It's a story that reveals something profound about both species, about the nature of consciousness and connection, about what it means to be alive, or undead, or something in between. To understand how an orc could become friends with a Necron, we must first understand each species individually. We must dive deep into their psychologies, their histories, their fundamental natures. We must explore what makes an orc tick, what drives a Necron forward through the millennia. We must understand their ancient enmity, now born in a war that predates most of the galaxy's current inhabitants. We must see them not as simple archetypes of brutality or cold calculation, but as complex entities with their own forms of culture, honor, and even emotion. The war in heaven, that ancient conflict fought millions of years before humanity even evolved, set orcs and Necrons on opposing sides of existence itself. The orcs, or rather their precursors the Krork, were created by the Old Ones as living weapons against the Necrontyr and their godlike Satan masters. Engineered for war, designed to be the ultimate soldiers, the Krork were biological war machines, capable of adapting and evolving to face any threat. The Necrontyr, meanwhile, had traded their diseased flesh for deathless metal bodies, yet becoming the Necrons in a desperate bid for immortality that cost them their very souls. These two species have been enemies longer than most stars have burned. Their conflict is written into the fundamental fabric of their beings. Orcs exist to fight, and Necrons exist to reclaim their lost empire. They are opposites in almost every conceivable way. Orcs are organic fungal creatures who reproduce through spores and thrive in chaos. Necrons are mechanical beings of perfect order who cannot reproduce and seek to restore the galaxy to its proper configuration under their rule. Orcs are loud, chaotic, and unpredictable. Necrons are silent, ordered, and methodical. Orcs gain strength from their numbers and their collective belief. Necrons gain strength from their ancient technology and their mastery over the material universe. Yet within these stark differences lie the seeds of something unexpected. Within the chaos of orc culture and the rigid order of Necron society, there exist individuals who break their species' molds. Orcs who might see beyond the simple joy of combat. Necrons who retain enough of their ancient personality to feel something other than disdain for lesser species. And in the space where these exceptions meet, in that vanishingly small probability where circumstances align just right, the impossible becomes merely improbable. This is not a story with a single definitive version. It exists across multiple possibilities, multiple interpretations, multiple timelines in the vast and contradictory lore of Warhammer 40,000. It draws from canon sources like novels and codices, from community discussions and player-created narratives, plus from the strange and wonderful ways that fans have explored the boundaries of this dark universe. It's a story that asks us to imagine what would happen if an orc, perhaps one particularly large and cunning, encountered a Necron who was not quite like his fellows. What would happen if circumstances forced them to fight alongside each other? What if an orc's reality-warping belief intersected with a Necron's damaged programming in just the right way? The answer to these questions reveals something beautiful about Warhammer 40,000. Despite its grim-dark setting, despite its endless war and cosmic horror, the universe still has room for moments of unexpected connection, for relationships that transcend the boundaries of species and circumstance, for friendships that shouldn't exist but do anyway. And because in a universe this large and this old and this strange, eventually even the impossible becomes inevitable. So settle in as we explore this peculiar corner of the 41st millennium. As we examine the nature of orcs and Necrons, their histories and psychologies, their rare moments of cooperation, and the fascinating characters who make such cooperation possible. As we venture into the realm of fan speculation and community storytelling, where the rigid boundaries of official lore give way to creative exploration. As we discover why the idea of an orc befriending a Necron captures the imagination so completely, and what it reveals about our own desire to find light in the darkness, hope in the grim dark, and connection in a universe designed for isolation. Yet the nature of the orcs, more than simple brutes. To understand how an orc could become friends with anyone, let alone a Necron, we must first strip away the common misconceptions about these green-skinned warriors. Many view orcs as nothing more than mindless brutes, as savage barbarians who lack the intelligence for complex thought or feeling. This view is dangerously incorrect. Orcs are far more sophisticated than they appear, and their psychology operates on principles that make them uniquely suited for certain types of relationships that other species would find impossible. Orcs are not truly animals, nor are they truly plants, though they share characteristics with both. They are fungal organisms, a unique form of life engineered by the ancient Old Ones during the war in heaven. Their biology is a marvel of organic engineering, are designed for warfare, but possessing depths that even the orcs themselves don't fully understand. Every orc is born from spores, emerging from the ground already possessing genetic knowledge passed down through millions of years of evolution. A newborn orc knows how to fight, knows the basics of his culture, knows instinctively his role in orc society. But what makes orcs truly unique, what sets them apart from every other species in the galaxy, is their gestalt psychic field. Orcs are all latent psychers, each one contributing to a collective unconscious that shapes reality itself. Individually, an orc's psychic power is negligible, barely noticeable. But when orcs gather in groups, their combined psychic energy creates something remarkable. It creates a field of belief made manifest, where the collective faith of thousands or millions of greenskins can actually alter the laws of physics to match their expectations. This is why orc technology works. Their ramshackle weapons and vehicles, cobbled together from scrap metal and held together with little more than wishful thinking, function because the orcs believe they will function. Red vehicles go faster because orcs believe red ones go faster. Bullets fly straighter when fired from guns painted with lucky colors. A massive cannon will fire devastating rounds, even if its internal mechanisms shouldn't work, simply because every orc knows that big guns shoot good. This isn't magic in the traditional sense, though it draws on the same psychic energies that power sorcery. It's belief made real, expectation made manifest, as a collective delusion so powerful that the universe itself bends to accommodate it. This psychic field has profound implications for how orcs form relationships. Orcs don't form friendships in the way humans understand them. They don't have long heart-to-heart conversations or share their deepest feelings, but they do form bonds based on shared combat experience, on mutual respect for strength and cunning, on the simple joy of finding a good fighting companion. An orc respects any being that can put up a proper scrap. They admire cunning and brutality in equal measure. They appreciate anyone who makes fighting interesting and challenging. More than this, orcs have a capacity for loyalty that often surprises those who don't understand them. An orc will follow his warboss through fire and death, not out of fear, but out of genuine respect and admiration. An orc will stand shoulder to shoulder with his fellow boys against overwhelming odds, trusting in the strength of the group. This loyalty isn't sentimental. It isn't based on abstract concepts of honor or duty. It's based on the simple, direct understanding that strong bonds make for better fighting, that a mob of orcs working together is stronger than any individual warrior. The orc concept of friendship, if we can call it that, is fundamentally different from human friendship, but no less real. It's a relationship built on shared violence, on the pleasure of a good fight, on the unspoken understanding that comes from warriors who have faced death together. An orc doesn't need to articulate why he likes fighting alongside another being. He doesn't need to examine his feelings or express his appreciation. The relationship simply is, existing in the moment, as direct and uncomplicated as everything else in orc culture. This directness, this lack of pretense, makes orcs potentially capable of unusual relationships. An orc doesn't care if his fighting companion is another orc, or a human, or even something mechanical. What matters is whether that companion is good to fight with, whether they make the battle more interesting, whether they're properly brutal or cunningly clever. An orc judges others by their actions in combat, not by their species or appearance. If a Necron proved himself a worthy fighter, if he demonstrated strength and tactical ability, if he provided good opposition or became a reliable ally in a particularly exciting battle, as an orc might develop something resembling respect for that Necron. And here's where the psychic field becomes crucial. If an orc believes something strongly enough, if he genuinely thinks a particular Necron is his companion or ally, that belief begins to take on a kind of reality, not in the sense of mind control or forcing the Necron to reciprocate, but in the sense that the orc's perception shapes his behavior, which in turn shapes the relationship. An orc who believes he's fighting alongside a metal companion will act accordingly, will cover that companion's back, will share the joy of battle with him. And in a universe where belief has power, where the collective unconscious of millions of psychic beings can alter reality, such a relationship might become more real than it has any right to be. Our orcs also possess a strange kind of wisdom that comes from their simplicity. They understand instinctively things that other species have to learn through painful experience. They know that fighting alongside strong warriors makes you stronger. They know that a good enemy makes for a good fight. They know that holding grudges is less fun than just smashing whoever's in front of you right now. This pragmatic philosophy means orcs are actually quite capable of putting aside enmity when circumstances call for it, especially if there's a better fight to be had elsewhere. The largest and most powerful orcs, the warbosses and big mechs who lead their kind, often possess surprising intelligence alongside their tremendous physical strength. These are not simple creatures. They are cunning tacticians who understand psychology, logistics, and strategy. They know how to read an opponent, how to exploit weaknesses, how to motivate their boys to ever greater feats of violence. Such an orc, encountering a Necron under the right circumstances, might recognize something worth respecting, might see past the metal body to the ancient warrior underneath, might understand on some level that here is a being who has fought for longer than most species have existed. Different orc clans also approach warfare and relationships differently. The blood axes, for instance, are known for their willingness to learn from other species, to adopt tactics from enemies they respect. They're looked down upon by other orcs for being too cunning and not brutal enough, but they're also remarkably successful. A blood axe orc would be far more likely to form a working relationship with a Necron than, a goth who believes in nothing but straightforward violence. The Bad Moons, wealthy by orc standards and flashy in their presentation, might appreciate the ancient technology and craftsmanship of Necron artifacts. The Death Skulls, notorious looters who believe blue is lucky, might develop a strange admiration for Necrons whose technology they covet. What matters most in understanding orcs is recognizing that beneath their brutal exterior lies a species with its own forms of emotion, loyalty, and appreciation. They may express these differently than humans or Eldar. They may not articulate feelings or analyze relationships, but the capacity for connection is there. An orc can respect another warrior. An orc can enjoy fighting alongside a particularly skilled companion. An orc can, in his own unique way, form something that looks remarkably like friendship. The Necrons, consciousness in machines. If understanding orcs requires us to look past their savage appearance, understanding Necrons requires us to grapple with something far more disturbing and tragic. The Necrons are not simply robots. They are not artificial intelligences programmed to mimic life. They are the preserved consciousnesses of a once-living species, trapped for millions of years in bodies of living metal, stripped of everything that made them truly alive. To understand a Necron is to understand a kind of existence that borders on cosmic horror, a fate worse than death that has nevertheless granted a terrible form of immortality. The Necrons were once the Necron tier, a humanoid species cursed by the radiation of their home star. Their lives were short and painful, their flesh constantly ravaged by cancers and mutations. They were a brilliant people, masters of technology and astrophysics, but they were mortal in the most brutal sense of the word. When they encountered the Old Ones, an ancient species who had mastered life itself and seemed to enjoy an existence free from suffering and death, the Necrontier's envy turned to rage. They declared war on the Old Ones, beginning a conflict that would reshape the galaxy. But the Necrontier were losing. Despite their technological brilliance, they could not match the Old Ones' mastery of the warp and biological engineering. In desperation, they made a terrible bargain with the Satan, godlike beings of pure energy who fed on stars. The Satan promised the Necrontier immortality, freedom from their diseased flesh, bodies that would never age or sicken. What the Satan didn't mention, or perhaps what the Necrontier were too desperate to question, was the price of this transformation. Biotransference stripped the Necrontier of everything that made them alive. Their consciousness was copied into mechanical bodies, but the transfer was imperfect by design. The Satan fed on their souls, devouring the spark of life that animated them, leaving behind only hollow echoes of personality trapped in metal shells. Some Necrons retained much of their original consciousness and memory. Others lost almost everything, becoming little more than autonomous war machines. All of them lost something fundamental, some core aspect of being that can never be recovered. The tragedy of the Necrons cannot be overstated. They achieved immortality and lost themselves in the process. They can never truly rest, and never truly die. They cannot feel physical sensation in the way living beings do. They cannot taste food or feel the warmth of a sun on their skin. They cannot create new life or form new memories in the same way they once did. Their existence is one of eternal, grinding awareness, conscious thought divorced from living experience. They are ghosts in machines, spirits bound to metal prisons, aware of what they've lost, but unable to reclaim it. Different Necrons have responded to this existence in different ways. The Necron overlords and pharaons, the nobility who retained most of their consciousness, often cling to the protocols and hierarchies of their ancient empire. They pursue grand campaigns of conquest, seeking to restore the Necron dominion over a galaxy that has moved on without them. They scheme and plot, form dynasties and wage wars, desperately attempting to fill the void of their existence with purpose and achievement. But beneath their strategic brilliance lies a terrible emptiness, a fundamental lack that no amount of conquest can fill. Some Necrons have gone mad in the millions of years since biotransference. The Great Sleep, that long hibernation while the galaxy changed around them, damaged many minds. Some Necrons awoke confused, their memories corrupted or rewritten. Others developed obsessions, fixating on single ideas or goals with the intensity that only an immortal machine intelligence can muster. Still others experience something like despair, a slow erosion of self that leaves them hollow even by Necron standards. What makes Necrons particularly fascinating is that some of them still feel, not in the way living beings feel, or perhaps, but in some reduced or altered form that persists despite biotransference. They can experience what might be called pride or ambition or anger. They can form preferences and make aesthetic judgments. They can remember what it was like to be alive and mourn that loss, even if the memory is more like data retrieval than true recollection. The greatest of them retain personalities complex enough to rival any living being, with all the quirks and contradictions that implies. The Necrons view organic life with contempt, but this contempt often masks something deeper. They see in the living a reminder of what they've lost. Every organic being, no matter how primitive, possesses something the Necrons can never reclaim: the ability to reproduce, to create new consciousness from nothing, the experience of biological sensation, or of pleasure and pain, the natural cycle of birth and death that gives life meaning through its limitation. Some Necrons hate organic life out of pure envy. Others simply see biological beings as temporary annoyances, mayflies that buzz briefly before disappearing while the Necrons endure forever. But not all Necrons are identical in their views. The nobility, those who retained most of their original personalities, often have complex and nuanced opinions about the other species of the galaxy. Some, like Trazyn the Infinite, view all life as worthy of preservation and study, even if only as historical artifacts. Others, like Imhotep the Stormlord, respect martial prowess wherever they find it, even in organic warriors. Still others, like Xandrek, have damaged minds that allow them to see the galaxy in ways other Necrons cannot. The capacity for a Necron to form relationships depends entirely on how much of their original personality survived biotransference and the Great Sleep. A basic Necron warrior, little more than an automated weapons platform, cannot form any relationship beyond following programmed commands. A Necron lord, retaining more consciousness, might develop something like loyalty to his dynasty or respect for a particularly capable rival. A Necron overlord or pharaon, possessing the full complexity of personality that survived the transformation, might be capable of forming something that genuinely resembles friendship, though expressing or acknowledging such a thing would be complicated by their mechanical nature and the rigid hierarchies of Necron society. Necrons also possess an ancient memory of honor and martial tradition. Before biotransference, the Necrontire were a warrior culture with complex codes of conduct governing warfare and politics. Some Necrons, particularly those of the older dynasties, still cling to these traditions. They follow rules of engagement that other species would consider absurdly formal. They offer terms of surrender before annihilating enemies. They treat captured commanders with a certain respect, even if that respect ends in execution. This adherence to ancient protocol creates space for unusual interactions, for moments where a Necron might recognize honorable behavior in an enemy and respond accordingly. The most important thing to understand about Necrons is that they are not uniform. Each dynasty developed its own culture, its own traditions, its own response to their terrible transformation. And as the Sautek dynasty produces brilliant strategists like Imhotep, the Mefrit dynasty embraces their role as solar destroyers. The Nihilak dynasty obsessively preserves their territory exactly as it was in ancient times. and within each dynasty, individual Necrons retain enough personality to differ from their fellows. This diversity means that some Necrons, under the right circumstances, with the right damage to their programming or preservation of their original personality, might be capable of forming relationships that most of their kind would consider impossible. Consider the differences between various Necron leaders and how those differences create varying possibilities for unusual relationships. Imhotep, the Stormlord, is a tactical genius whose strategic brilliance has never failed him in battle. Or he respects martial prowess wherever he finds it, even in organic species. He maintains a tradition of severing the right hands of defeated foes as trophies, a practice that speaks to both his ruthlessness and his acknowledgement of worthy opponents. An orc who fought particularly well against Imhotep's forces might earn a strange form of respect, perhaps even be spared for future battles, because Imhotep finds that particular opponent's tactical decisions interesting. Anrakir the Traveler represents another variant of Necron personality. He wanders the galaxy awakening tomb worlds and assisting dynasties in need, driven by a sense of duty to his entire species rather than loyalty to a single dynasty. This broader perspective might make him more capable of recognizing value in other species. He already demonstrated pragmatism in the Cryptus system, allying with Blood Angels against Tyranids. An orc who proved useful in awakening or defending a tomb world might earn Anrakir's temporary alliance, perhaps even a kind of professional respect. The Silent King, Zarek himself, carries the weight of ultimate responsibility for biotransference. He ordered the transformation that damned his entire species, and now seeks some way to restore what was lost. This guilt and desperate searching creates psychological complexity that might, theoretically, make him capable of unusual relationships. If an orc somehow demonstrated knowledge or capability relevant to reversing biotransference, Zarek might treat that orc very differently from how other Necrons would. Even the more damaged or obsessed Necrons present possibilities. Yet the Flayer-cursed Necrons, driven mad by a hunger for flesh they can never satisfy, might fixate on a particular orc in strange ways. A destroyer cult. Necron, dedicated to ending all life, might develop an obsessive rivalry with an orc warboss that borders on twisted respect. These aren't healthy relationships by any measure, but they're relationships nonetheless, connections that go beyond simple enemy status. The hierarchical nature of Necron society also creates interesting dynamics. A Necron lord serves an overlord who serves a pharaon. Lower-ranking Necrons have more rigid programming, less autonomy, fewer retained personality traits. But they also have more reason to form unusual alliances if it serves their lord's interests. A Necron lord tasked with achieving objectives that require orc cooperation might develop working relationships with greenskin commanders out of pure pragmatism, relationships that over time could evolve into something more. The tragedy and complexity of Necron existence makes them surprisingly relatable, despite their inhuman nature. They are beings who have lived too long, who have seen everything they valued turn to dust, who continue because they have no choice but to continue. They seek purpose in an existence that offers none. They cling to memories and traditions that no longer have meaning in the galaxy as it exists today. And some of them, the most interesting ones, still search for something that might fill the void where their souls once resided. Connection, perhaps, understanding, recognition from another conscious being that they still exist in some meaningful sense. This searching, this desperate grasping for meaning and purpose creates the possibility for unexpected relationships. A Necron who encounters another being who treats them as something other than a mindless machine, who recognizes the ancient consciousness behind the metal face, who demonstrates qualities the Necron can respect or even admire. Such a Necron might respond in ways that surprise both parties. They might find themselves forming something that their programming says is impossible, that their hierarchical society considers beneath them, but that some deep remnant of their Necron-tire consciousness recognizes as valuable. Zandrek, the mad overlord who sees truth among all the Necrons in the galaxy. And no individual is more likely to form an unusual relationship with an orc than Nemesor Zandrek. His story is simultaneously tragic and darkly comedic, a perfect example of how damage and madness might sometimes be closer to wisdom than clarity. Zandrek is a Necron overlord of the Sautek dynasty, ruler of the tomb world Gidrim, and one of the most brilliant military strategists the Necrons have ever produced. He has led his forces to victory in countless campaigns, expanding Gidrim's territory across multiple star systems. His tactical acumen is respected even by other Necron nobles who view him with suspicion and contempt. He is, by all measures, an exceptional leader and warrior. He is also completely insane. Zandrek's madness takes a very specific form. Damage sustained during the Great Sleep has corrupted his memory engrams, leaving him convinced that he is still a living Necron-tire, waging the wars of secession that preceded biotransference. He does not perceive his enemies as orcs, humans, Eldar, or any of the galaxy's current inhabitants. Instead, he sees them all as fellow Necrontyr, rebellious subjects attempting to usurp the rightful authority of the Triarch. He does not understand that millions of years have passed since he drew breath. He does not recognize that his flesh body is long gone, replaced by a shell of living metal. In his mind, he is still alive, still mortal, still fighting the political conflicts of an empire that existed before most stars were born. This delusion fundamentally changes how Zandrek approaches warfare and relationships, where other Necrons see primitive organic life forms to be exterminated, as Zandrek sees honorable opponents who have simply chosen the wrong side in a political dispute. Where other Necrons unleash overwhelming force without mercy, Zandrek offers terms of surrender and treats enemy commanders with a respect bordering on courtesy. He invites captured opponents to dine with him aboard his flagship, discussing strategy and politics as if speaking with fellow nobles. He refuses to use assassins or underhanded tactics, believing them beneath the dignity of a true warrior. Most remarkably, Zandrek treats his enemies as if they are people worthy of respect. He learns their names. He acknowledges their tactical decisions, praising clever strategies and criticizing poor ones. He keeps captured commanders as honored guests, providing them with comfortable quarters and engaging them in long conversations about warfare and philosophy. When these prisoners inevitably die, either from escape attempts or simply because organic beings cannot survive indefinitely in Necron vessels, Zandrek mourns them as one would mourn a respected rival. His bodyguard, Oberon, quietly ensures that loose ends are tied up, that the practical necessities of warfare are handled while Zandrek maintains his illusion of civilized conflict.
I'll be honest with you, when I first started researching Necron lore, Zandrek's story hit me harder than I expected. Here's this ancient being, millions of years old, and his madness is actually a mercy. He gets to remember what it was like to be alive, to have honor in relationships, while his saner companions just endure an empty existence. And then you think about orcs, who are probably the most alive species in the setting, despite being a little fungus. They experience pure joy in combat, genuine loyalty to their warband, real excitement about a good fight. Put those two together and you get this beautiful tragedy where neither really understands the other, but somehow they connect anyway. It's a kind of nuance that keeps me coming back to 40K after all these years. The setting is dark, sure, but it's dark in interesting ways. But anyway, let's get back to the story.
The relationship between Zandrek and his Varguard Oberon is itself a testament to the possibility of connection in inhuman circumstances. Oberon is fully aware of their true nature. He knows they are Necrons, knows that millions of years have passed, knows that the beings they fight are not Necron-tire rebels, but entirely different species. Yet he never corrects his lord. He never attempts to wake Zandrek from his delusion. Instead, he protects it, manages the practical realities that Zandrek cannot or will not see, and ensures that his lord's eccentric approach to warfare doesn't compromise their military effectiveness. Why does Oberon do this? The surface answer is loyalty, that ancient and powerful bond between a lord and his vassal. But reading between the lines of various Necron stories, particularly the novella Severed, reveals something deeper. Oberon knows that Xandrek's madness is actually a kind of blessing. It allows his lord to experience something like the life they once had, to maintain connections and purposes that other Necrons have lost. Xandrek's delusion shields him from the full horror of their existence. He doesn't have to confront what they've become, doesn't have to face the void where his soul should be. In his madness, he maintains something other Necrons have lost, a sense of purpose and meaning that goes beyond simple conquest or survival. More than this, there are hints that Xandrek might not be as insane as he appears. In quiet moments, when speaking with Oberon, he sometimes demonstrates an awareness that suggests his madness might be partly performance, partly coping mechanism, partly a choice to see the world in a way that allows him to function without despairing. He knows, on some level, what they are. He chooses to remember what they were, and in that choice lies a kind of wisdom that his saner peers lack. When Xandrek encounters orcs, his unique perspective creates fascinating possibilities. One, he doesn't see them as primitive greenskins, as savage barbarians to be exterminated without thought. He sees them as another faction in the Wars of Secession, as the Orc dynasty attempting to challenge Sautek authority. He evaluates them according to their actions in battle, not their appearance or species. An Orc war boss who demonstrates tactical brilliance might earn Xandrek's genuine respect. An Orc mob that fights with particular ferocity might be praised as worthy opponents. An Orc prisoner of war might find himself treated with the same courtesy Xandrek extends to all captured commanders, seated at table discussing battle strategies while Xandrek reminisces about ancient campaigns. This creates a scenario where an Orc could, theoretically, develop something like a relationship with Xandrek. Now imagine an Orc war boss captured after a particularly fierce battle. Instead of being disintegrated or phased into a cell, he's escorted to comfortable quarters. He's invited to dinner, where a metal skeletal being treats him like an honored guest and a worthy adversary. The Orc, confused but intrigued, might play along. After all, this is interesting. This is different from normal fighting. This metal git treats him with respect, talks to him like an equal, acknowledges his strength and cunning. The Orc might not understand what's happening, might not grasp that Xandrek thinks he's a fellow Necron from millions of years ago. But he would understand respect when he receives it. He would recognize honor even in this strange form. And if circumstances somehow thrust them into fighting alongside each other, perhaps against a mutual threat like Tyranids or Chaos forces, the Orc might find that fighting beside this particular Necron is actually quite enjoyable. The metal git is clever, good at tactics, and clearly appreciates a proper scrap. In his straightforward Orcish way, the war boss might start to think of Xandrek as a good ally, maybe even a friend in the Orcish sense of the word. For Xandrek's part, he might genuinely come to value this Orc's company, not because he understands the Orc's true nature, but precisely because he doesn't. He sees a capable warrior, a cunning strategist who demonstrates the martial virtues he respects. He sees someone he can talk to about warfare and tactics, someone who appreciates a well-executed strategy. In his mind, this is exactly what relationships were like in the old days, before biotransference, as when warriors could meet in honorable combat and then share drinks afterward, discussing what worked and what didn't. The tragedy underlying this potential friendship makes it all the more poignant. Xandrek would never understand that he's befriending an entirely different species, one that wouldn't have existed in his original lifetime. The Orc might never fully grasp that his metal companion is ancient beyond comprehension, a being who has fought longer than most civilizations have existed. Their friendship, if it can be called that, would be based on fundamental misunderstandings on both sides. Yet it would be real in its own way, built on genuine respect and mutual appreciation for combat prowess. Other Necrons would view such a relationship with horror and disgust. To see their revered Nemesor treating a primitive organic life form as an equal, conversing with it as if it were a noble lord, this would confirm their worst fears about Xandrek's instability. Some would call for his removal from command. Others would simply ignore it as another of his eccentricities, another sign that the Great Sleep damaged him beyond repair. None of them would understand that in his madness, Zandrek has achieved something they cannot. He has maintained the capacity for connection, for relationships that transcend species and circumstance. He remains, in some essential way, more truly alive than his saner counterparts. When green meets metal, possible scenarios. The meeting of orcs and necrons typically results in immediate violence. Both species are warlike by nature, and both see conflict as the natural state of existence, and neither is inclined toward negotiation when axes and Gauss weapons can speak so much more clearly. Historical records show countless battles between Green Tide and Silver Legion, each conflict ending in massive casualties on both sides and no lasting resolution. The orcs see Necrons as particularly challenging opponents, tough enemies who make for good scraps even if they don't bleed properly. The Necrons see orcs as persistent vermin, annoying in their numbers and regenerative ability, but ultimately insignificant in the grand scheme of galactic reconquest. Yet within this pattern of endless conflict exist exceptions, moments where circumstances force these two ancient enemy species into proximity without immediate warfare. Understanding these scenarios helps us imagine how an orc and a Necron might form something resembling friendship, or at least a working relationship that could evolve into mutual respect. The most straightforward scenario involves a common enemy that threatens both species. The Battle of Farthest provides a canonical example of Necrons studying and dismantling an orc offensive. But imagine a different version, where an even greater threat forces temporary cooperation. A Tyrannid hive fleet, for instance, threatens both an orc-held world and a nearby Necron tomb world. The orcs fight because that's what they do, throwing themselves at the alien invaders with their usual enthusiasm. The Necrons emerge to protect their tomb world from being consumed. In the chaos of battle, an orc warboss and a Necron overlord might find themselves fighting back-to-back against the swarm. In such moments, old enmities can become secondary to immediate survival. The orc, delighting in the quality of the fight, might notice that the metal warriors beside him are damned effective at killing bugs. The Necron, focused on tactical efficiency, might recognize that the orc's aggressive tactics are creating openings his own forces can exploit. Neither would acknowledge cooperation explicitly. Both would maintain that they're simply fighting their own battle that happens to occupy the same battlefield, but the end result would be coordinated action against their mutual foe. After such a battle, possibilities multiply. A pragmatic Necron overlord might recognize the utility of occasionally directing orc aggression toward his own enemies. Orcs are easy to manipulate if you understand them, simple as pointing them at something and suggesting it might be a good fight. An overlord seeking to clear a system of Imperial forces might arrange for an orc raiding party to discover promising targets, knowing the Greenskins will enthusiastically assault positions that would be costly for Necron forces to take directly. This wouldn't be an alliance in any formal sense, merely calculated manipulation, but repeated interactions might breed a strange respect on both sides. From the orc perspective, any being who consistently provides good fights is worth keeping around. A Bloodaxe warboss, always looking for new tactics and advantages, might deliberately seek out a Necron force known for interesting battles. He wouldn't frame this as friendship or alliance, just as following where the best scraps can be found. But if a particular Necron overlord consistently delivers quality combat, if his strategies create interesting tactical puzzles for the orcs to solve, that warboss might start thinking of the metal gits as reliable opponents, the kind you can count on for a proper fight. Zandrek's particular madness creates even more interesting scenarios. Imagine an orc warboss whose forces clash repeatedly with Zandrek's dynasty. Each battle follows a strange pattern. The Necrons offer terms of surrender before fighting. They conduct warfare with almost ritualistic precision, and if the warboss is captured, he's treated with bizarre respect before somehow escaping or being released. To other orcs, this would be mere oddity, But to a particularly clever warboss, perhaps one of the Blood Axes, with their appreciation for cunning tactics, this could become something more. This hypothetical warboss might begin to understand the pattern. The Metal Commander wants a proper formal fight, conducts warfare according to old rules that nobody else follows anymore. There's honor in that, in an orcish way. There's respect for combat as something more than simple slaughter. The warboss might start reciprocating, conducting his own attacks with unusual discipline, taking his own captives and treating them well, engaging in this strange ritualized warfare because it's more interesting than normal battles. He probably wouldn't understand why he's doing this. Oz wouldn't articulate that he's matching Xandrek's behavior out of respect. He'd just know that fights with this particular metal git are always interesting in specific ways. Over multiple encounters, this could evolve. The warboss learns to predict Xandrek's tactics. Xandrek learns the warboss's preferences in combat. They develop a relationship through the only language both truly speak, warfare itself. Neither would call it friendship. Xandrek would see the Orc as a worthy rival in the Wars of Secession. The Orc would see Xandrek as the best fight around. But an outside observer might recognize their repeated conflicts as having evolved beyond simple enmity into something more complex. The power of Orc belief adds another layer to these scenarios. If an Orc genuinely believes something, as if that belief is shared by enough of his boys, their Gestalt psychic field begins to make it real in subtle ways. An Orc who believes a particular Necron is his companion, who genuinely thinks they're fighting together, might actually affect how that relationship functions. The Necron wouldn't be mind-controlled or fundamentally changed, but the Orc's conviction might create small synchronicities, moments where coordination comes more naturally than it should, where tactical cooperation happens almost instinctively. Consider an Orc mech boy captured by Trazyn, the Infinite. Trazyn, unlike most Necrons, genuinely appreciates all forms of life and technology. He might study the mech boy not as a specimen to dissect, but as an interesting example of biological engineering. He might ask questions about how Orc technology works, fascinated by the way their Gestalt field makes impossible things function. The mech boy, pleased to have someone who appreciates his work rather than just using it, might respond enthusiastically. He'd explain his creations, demonstrate his innovations, take pride in showing off to someone who actually understands craftsmanship. Would Trazyn release such a valuable subject? Probably not, given his collector's nature. But might he provide the mech boy with materials and tools, creating a small workshop within Solemnice where the Orc could continue his work? Absolutely. The mech boy might not even realize he's a prisoner, too engrossed in having unlimited resources and an appreciative audience. And if Trazyn occasionally deployed this particular Orc during field operations, allowing him to test his creations in actual combat, the mech boy might come to view his mechanical captor as a patron, maybe even a friend in his own green-skinned way. These scenarios remain theoretical, existing more in player imagination and fan theory than canon lore. Games Workshop's official material tends toward the more straightforward narrative of endless conflict. But the lore provides enough flexibility, enough gaps and possibilities that these scenarios don't contradict established canon. They simply explore the spaces between major battles, the quiet moments and strange circumstances that can occur in a galaxy as vast and ancient as Warhammer 40,000. What makes these scenarios compelling is their plausibility within the rules of the setting. Orcs are simple, but not stupid, capable of recognizing worthy opponents and adapting to unusual circumstances, whilst Necrons are bound by rigid protocols, but possess the intelligence and long-term perspective to recognize useful tools and interesting anomalies. Neither species is uniformly identical within itself. Both contain individuals capable of breaking their species molds. Put the right individuals in the right circumstances, add time and repeated interaction, and even the most unlikely relationship becomes possible. The power of belief, reality through green-tinted eyes. Understanding how an Orc could befriend a Necron requires delving deeper into one of Warhammer 40,000's most fascinating metaphysical concepts, the Orc Gestalt psychic field, and its ability to shape reality through collective belief. This isn't simple magic or delusion, though it shares characteristics with both. This is reality warping on a scale that makes even the most powerful psykers nervous, achieved not through individual power, but through the accumulated faith of millions or billions of green-skinned believers. Every orc generates a small amount of psychic energy, not consciously wielded, but simply emanated as a byproduct of their existence. Individually, this energy is negligible, barely detectable even by sensitive instruments or powerful psykers. But orcs are never truly alone. They grow in clusters from spores, fight in mobs, congregate into warbands, and eventually massive gatherings. As their numbers increase, their individual psychic emanations combine and amplify, creating a field of warped reality that grows stronger with each added orc. This field operates on a principle that seems absurd to more rational species. Things work because orcs believe they should work. A vehicle held together with little more than scrap metal and hope functions because the orcs don't question whether it should function. A gun that by all physical laws should explode in the user's hands instead fires devastating rounds because the orc wielding it knows, without doubt, that it's a shooter and shooters shoot. The more orcs who share a belief, the more powerfully that belief manifests in reality. The limits and capabilities of this field are hotly debated among Imperial Magi biologists and Chaos sorcerers alike. Some believe orcs could reshape reality wholesale if they ever unified under a single vision. Others argue the effect is more subtle, that it merely enhances what's already possible rather than creating entirely new physical laws. The truth likely lies somewhere between these extremes. The Gestalt field can't make the impossible possible, but it can push improbable things into actuality. It makes marginally functional technology reliably functional. It makes dangerous weapons safe for orc use. It makes unlikely coincidences happen with surprising regularity. Color association provides clear examples of this effect in action. Orcs universally believe red makes things faster. This isn't based on any physical principle. Red paint has no aerodynamic or mechanical properties that would increase velocity. Yet orc vehicles painted red demonstrably move faster than identical vehicles painted other colors, at least when operated by orcs. Similarly, yellow explosions are bigger. Blue is lucky. Purple makes things harder to see. These effects are measurable and real, even though they make no rational sense. The universe literally bends to accommodate orcish expectations. This raises fascinating questions about how the Gestalt field might affect relationships. If an orc believes strongly enough that a particular Necron is his ally or friend, does that belief create reality in some sense? Not mind control, not forcing the Necron to reciprocate against his will, but perhaps creating circumstances that make cooperation more natural, communication more successful, coordination more effective. The orc's absolute conviction that they're working together might actually make working together easier than it should be. Consider the hypothetical scenario of an orc warboss who, through repeated encounters with Zandrek, has come to think of the Necron overlord as a good metal git. This orc doesn't understand the concept of cross-species friendship in any sophisticated way. He simply knows that fighting alongside this particular metal warrior is more fun than fighting against him. He believes, in his straightforward orcish manner, that the metal git is part of his mob, an honorary member of his warband. This belief, shared by enough of his boys who've also fought alongside Zandrek, creates a small local reality where such cooperation actually works better than it should. Commands between the two forces coordinate more smoothly. Tactical decisions complement each other without explicit communication. Potential conflicts or misunderstandings resolve themselves through improbable coincidences. None of this rises to the level of miracle or obvious supernatural intervention. It simply makes a very improbable relationship slightly more functional, slightly more real. The field's power grows with numbers, which creates interesting scaling possibilities. A single orc believing something has minimal effect. 10 orcs sharing a belief create a noticeable effect. Hundreds of orcs create measurable changes. Thousands or millions of orcs can warp reality significantly within their immediate vicinity. This means a relationship between an individual orc and a Necron would have limited reality warping support, unless that orc was influential enough to spread his belief to his mob. But imagine a respected war boss, one whose boys trust his judgment and follow his lead. If he comes to see a particular Necron as an ally, his boys will accept that judgment without much question. They don't need to understand why the boss likes this metal git. They just need to know that the boss says he's all right. And when you have thousands of orcs all casually accepting that this Necron is part of the warband, even if just temporarily, their collective field begins to support that reality. The mechanics of how this belief translates into reality remain mysterious, even to those who study orcs extensively. It's not simply that orcs hallucinate and behave according to their hallucinations. The actual physical universe changes in subtle but measurable ways. When orcs believe red vehicles go faster, those vehicles demonstrably achieve higher speeds when measured by external instruments. This isn't perception or psychology. It's fundamental reality alteration on a localized scale. Applied to relationships, this might mean that an orc's belief in friendship creates real effects that support that friendship's existence and continuation. Communication becomes easier than it should be between species with no common language. Coordination happens more smoothly than random chance would allow. Misunderstandings that should end the relationship somehow resolve themselves favorably. None of this is dramatic or obvious, but cumulative small effects can have large impacts over time. There's also the question of feedback loops. If the orc's belief in friendship makes the relationship work better, and that success reinforces the orc's belief, the cycle strengthens itself. Each positive interaction makes the orc believe more strongly, which makes future interactions more likely to succeed, which further reinforces belief. Given enough time and repetition, what started as tentative cooperation could become an unshakable conviction that this particular metal git is the orc's best companion. The cultural transmission of orc beliefs adds another layer. Orcs don't write history books or maintain detailed records, but they do tell stories. They share tales of great battles and legendary warriors. If an orc war boss develops a relationship with a Necron, his boys will talk about it. They'll embellish and exaggerate because that's what orcs do. Remember when the boss fought alongside that big metal git? They crumped thousands of their enemy, they did. These stories spread through the mob, creating a shared narrative about the metal git who's somehow part of their warband. Younger orcs, emerging from spores after these events, might grow up hearing these stories as established fact. To them, the idea that this particular Necron is allied with their warband isn't strange or unprecedented. It's just how things are. They might never question it, accepting from their first conscious moments that while most metal gits are enemies, this one is different. This generational transmission of belief could sustain a relationship far beyond any individual orc's lifetime. The Gestalt field might even affect the Necron more directly than we'd expect. While Necrons have no souls in the traditional sense, they are conscious entities. Their minds, however they're stored and implemented in living metal, must interface with reality somehow. If psychic energy can disrupt Necron systems, as we know it can, or perhaps belief-based reality alteration can subtly influence Necron consciousness. Not mind control, not personality rewriting, but gentle nudges toward behaviors that align with orc expectations. A Necron might find himself making decisions that he rationally knows are suboptimal, but that somehow feel right, protecting an orc position when tactically he should focus elsewhere, sharing information that protocol says should be restricted, engaging in behaviors that his programming doesn't mandate, but that somehow seem appropriate. He might rationalize these choices, find logical explanations for them, never recognizing that he's being subtly influenced by the reality-warping belief of thousands of greenskins who've decided he's one of the boys. The philosophical implications extend even further. If consciousness can be shaped by belief, if relationships can be made real through collective conviction, what does this say about the nature of reality in Warhammer 40,000? The setting already establishes that thought and emotion shape the warp, that gods can be born from belief, that sufficient faith can actually alter physical laws. Orc gestalt fields are simply another manifestation of this fundamental principle. Consciousness doesn't just observe reality, it participates in creating it. For orcs and Necrons specifically, this creates fascinating possibilities. The Necrons sought to escape the warp and its dangers by becoming purely material beings. But if sufficiently strong belief can reach across the gap between immaterial and material, if orc conviction can touch even soulless machines, then the Necrons' escape from the warp might not be as complete as they thought. They've removed themselves from the warp, but they still exist in a universe where consciousness shapes reality, where belief has power, where even metal bodies and mechanical minds can be influenced by the collective unconscious of millions of psychic beings. This doesn't make Necrons vulnerable to chaos, as they lack the souls that demons feed upon, but it does suggest they're not immune to all psychic phenomena. Orc belief-based reality warping operates on different principles than warp sorcery. It doesn't corrupt or tempt or possess. It simply makes things true through sheer collective conviction. A Necron might resist a demon's influence absolutely while being subtly affected by 10,000 orcs who genuinely believe he's their ally. The Necron would experience this as a strange sense of things working more smoothly than expected when cooperating with the orcs. His tactical suggestions might be implemented with surprising efficiency. Orc units might be in position when needed without explicit orders. The natural chaos of orc warfare might resolve itself in ways that support coordinated action. A sufficiently analytical Necron might notice these anomalies, might wonder at the statistical improbability of such successful cooperation. Zandrek, in his delusion, would simply accept it as the natural result of working with capable allies. Either way, the relationship would be reinforced by success. There's also the question of whether orc belief might affect the Necron directly. Could sufficiently powerful conviction override a Necron's programming, alter his behavior in subtle ways, perhaps even restore fragments of emotion or personality? This enters the realm of pure speculation, far beyond what canon lore definitively establishes. But consider, Necrons are not purely mechanical. Their consciousness exists in living metal, an exotic material that interfaces with the Imperium in ways conventional technology cannot. Warp energy affects them despite their lack of souls. Psychic phenomena can disrupt their systems. If psychic belief made manifest can alter physical reality, might it also alter whatever strange form of consciousness persists in Necron engrams? The answer would likely be subtle rather than dramatic. An orc mob believing a Necron is their friend wouldn't transform that Necron into an actual friend against his will. But it might make him slightly more receptive to cooperation, slightly less hostile, slightly more willing to interpret actions charitably. Over time, with repeated reinforcement, these slight adjustments might accumulate into genuine behavioral changes. The Necron might find himself actually enjoying interactions with these particular orcs, might catch himself acting in protective ways toward them, might develop what in a living being would be called affection. We must be careful not to overstate this effect. The Gestalt field is powerful, but not omnipotent. It operates within constraints and limits. It can't force fundamental personality changes or override core programming. A Necron warrior, whose consciousness is minimal and rigidly controlled, wouldn't develop friendship no matter how many orcs believed in it. But a Necron lord or overlord with more autonomy and personality might find his attitude shifting in unexpected ways. The philosophical implications are dizzying. If orc belief can make friendship real, what does that say about the nature of relationships in general? Are all friendships ultimately constructions, made real through mutual belief and agreement? Does the mechanism matter if the end result is genuine connection and mutual support? In a universe where thought and emotion literally shape reality through the warp, perhaps orc friendship is more metaphysically legitimate than relationships based on mere logical affinity or shared interests. This also highlights something profound about orcs. Their honest simplicity might be a strength rather than a weakness. They don't overthink relationships or question their feelings, or they don't analyze why they like fighting alongside someone or worry about the appropriateness of cross-species friendship. They simply know what they like, believe what they believe, and act accordingly. And in a universe where belief literally creates reality, that straightforward conviction makes them capable of relationships that more sophisticated species would consider impossible. Trazyn the Infinite, the collector's perspective. If Xandrek represents the possibility of friendship through madness, Trazyn the Infinite represents something entirely different: connection through curiosity and appreciation. Trazyn is perhaps the most unusual Necron in the entire galaxy, so eccentric that other overlords view him with suspicion, bordering on contempt. While his peers focus on conquest and restoration of ancient territories, our Trazyn pursues a singular obsession: collecting. He is the curator of Solemnace, a museum tomb world where he preserves examples of every species, every culture, every significant event in galactic history. His galleries contain entire frozen populations, artifacts from lost civilizations, and unique specimens of biological and technological achievement. To call Trazyn a mere collector understates the complexity of his character. He is a historian and archaeologist, a curator and scholar, someone who genuinely values all forms of life and creation, not for their military utility, but for their inherent interest. He travels the galaxy, seeking additions to his collection, appearing at pivotal moments to steal artifacts, or even entire armies for preservation. His methods are questionable by any ethical standard, at essentially kidnapping and imprisoning specimens for all eternity. But his motivations set him apart from typical Necron malice. He doesn't collect out of cruelty or domination. He collects because he finds the universe fascinating and wants to preserve it for eternity. This perspective creates unique possibilities for relationships with orcs. Where most Necrons see orcs as primitive vermin, Trazyn sees them as remarkable examples of Old One biological engineering. He appreciates their elegant solution to the problem of creating self-sustaining warrior populations. He finds their Gestalt psychic field fascinating, a form of reality manipulation that operates on principles completely different from Necron technology or warp sorcery. He marvels at how their technology works despite all logical rules, and how their culture manages to be simultaneously brutish and surprisingly sophisticated. Trazyn has demonstrated this appreciation in concrete ways. His galleries contain orc exhibits, not just static displays, but living, functioning environments. He has preserved entire orc settlements, complete with active orcoids, who continue their lives unaware they're in a museum. Most famously, his collection includes Gorkamorka, or perhaps a representation of Gorkamorka, the twin-headed god of the orcs. His Angelus display features working orc vehicles racing across a recreation of their environment, trucks and buggies howling through a desert shantytown built around a massive orc idol. This suggests Trazyn doesn't merely collect orcs as specimens. He preserves their culture, their way of life, their essential orcishness. That he studies how they function, maintains their environments, perhaps even interviews his specimens to better understand their perspective. An orc captured by Trazyn might initially resist, but would soon find himself in circumstances that actually suit an orc quite well. Plenty of fighting against other specimens or security systems, access to tools and scrap for building things, freedom to engage in orcish pursuits within a limited domain. It's not so different from orc life on any given world, just more curated. An intelligent orc, perhaps a blood axe, or a particularly clever mech boy, might come to appreciate this situation. Here is a being who values orc craftsmanship and culture enough to preserve it, who provides resources and opportunities for creation, who asks questions about orc beliefs and practices, are genuinely interested in the answers. Such an orc might develop a strange form of respect for his captor, might even come to see Trazyn as a patron of sorts. Not a friend in any conventional sense, but someone whose goals align with the orc's own interest in building and fighting and generally being orky. Trazyn's interactions with his collection reveal something crucial about his character. He forms attachments. He has favorite pieces. He becomes genuinely distressed when important artifacts are damaged or lost. When Orican ruined his Gorkamorka exhibit, Trazyn's response was deeply personal, angry in a way that suggests the exhibit meant more to him than just another display piece. This emotional investment, this capacity to care about his collection beyond its scholarly value, indicates Trazyn retains more genuine feeling than most Necrons. What would happen if an orc in Trazyn's collection proved particularly interesting or useful? If a mech boy's innovations caught his attention, or a war boss's tactical thinking intrigued him? Trazyn has been known to deploy his collection during crises, releasing preserved forces to fight threats to Solemnace. He might bring such an orc out repeatedly for various purposes, testing new exhibits, defending against intruders, even accompanying him on collecting expeditions. Repeated interactions would create familiarity, perhaps even something resembling friendship. From the orc's perspective, this would be a grand adventure. Fighting strange enemies in weird places, seeing sights no other orc has ever seen. Working alongside a metal being who appreciates good work and provides endless opportunities for interesting scraps. The orc wouldn't think of himself as a prisoner or specimen. He'd think of himself as part of the best warband ever, one that goes everywhere and fights everything. The fact that his boss is a metal skeleton instead of a green giant would be irrelevant. What matters is the quality of the fights and the appreciation of his skills. Trazyn's canon interactions with other species demonstrate this possibility. He has worked alongside Imperial forces when circumstances demanded it, treating human commanders with a peculiar courtesy that suggests he sees them as more than simple enemies. He converses with Orican despite their rivalry, engaging in debates and arguments that reveal genuine intellectual respect beneath their antagonism. If he can recognize value in humans and other Necrons, recognizing value in a particularly clever or useful orc isn't much of a stretch. The novel, The Infinite and the Divine, reveals Trazyn's complex views on humanity, and by extension, might apply to other species. He acknowledges humanity's achievement in dominating the galaxy despite their fragility. He notes that every human world produces something worthy of preservation, some unique cultural achievement or innovation. He even shows something resembling empathy, understanding that fear is a poor substitute for good leadership, and that loyal service should be rewarded. These aren't the thoughts of a being incapable of connection or appreciation. Apply this thinking to orcs. Yes, and fascinating possibilities emerge. Trazyn would recognize that orcs, in their way, are remarkably successful. They've spread across the galaxy, adapted to countless environments, fought and survived conflicts that destroyed other species. Their culture, crude as it appears, maintains itself across millions of years and countless worlds. Their technology, ridiculous as it seems, actually works. An orc who demonstrated unusual intelligence or innovation would appeal to Trazyn's collector sensibilities. Such a specimen would be prized, maintained in optimal conditions, given opportunities to showcase his abilities. The relationship might be fundamentally unequal, with Trazyn always the master and the orc always the specimen. But within those constraints, genuine mutual appreciation could develop. The orc would appreciate having a patron who values his work and provides endless opportunities for excellence. Trazyn would appreciate having a specimen who exceeds expectations and provides genuine entertainment or assistance. Neither would call it friendship in conventional terms, but both might recognize that their relationship has evolved beyond simple captor and captive into something more mutually beneficial and even enjoyable. This scenario is more grounded in canon than the Zandrek examples. Trazyn definitely collects orcs. He definitely forms attachments to his collection. He definitely deploys his specimens in various circumstances. The logical extension of these established facts is that eventually, over enough time and interactions, one of his orc specimens might become something more than just another exhibit. It might become a tool he relies on, a companion he converses with, maybe even something that resembles a friend in the strange way that immortal beings measure such things. When circumstances demand, alliances of necessity. Canon Warhammer 40,000 lore provides actual examples of unlikely alliances, moments when ancient enmities take a back seat to practical necessity. These aren't friendships in any meaningful sense, but they demonstrate that even the most rigid species can cooperate when survival demands it. The most famous example is the Blood Angels' alliance with Necrons against Tyrannid Hive Fleet Leviathan, but this established precedent opens the door for similar scenarios involving orcs. The Cryptus System campaign showcases how pragmatic both Necrons and Space Marines can be, and when the Tyrannids threatened both the Blood Angels' fortress world and the awakening Necron tomb world, both species recognized that their mutual extinction was more likely than individual victory. Anrakir the Traveler, ever practical, reached out to Chapter Master Dante. Together, they coordinated a desperate gambit using ancient Necron technology to ignite a gas giant and scour the system of Tyrannid biomass. The alliance was temporary, ending immediately after the threat was neutralized, but it was real and effective. Apply this logic to orcs, and similar scenarios become plausible. Orcs are not diplomats, but they are pragmatic in their way. They fight whoever provides the best scrap, sometimes temporarily ignoring other enemies if a bigger and better target presents itself. A Necron overlord, facing overwhelming odds, might recognize that directing an orc military action toward his enemies could tip the balance. The orcs would fight because they love fighting, not caring that they're being manipulated if the battles are good. Consider a theoretical scenario. A Necron tomb world awakens in a system heavily contested by chaos forces. The Necrons are still groggy from the Great Sleep, their forces not yet at full strength. Chaos corrupts everything it touches, which Necrons find particularly offensive given their hatred of the warp. Meanwhile, an orc military operation passes through the same system, drawn by rumors of good fighting. A pragmatic Necron overlord might arrange for the orcs to discover the chaos positions, knowing greenskins will enthusiastically assault anything that puts up a good fight. From the orc perspective, they're just following the fights. They don't know or care that the metal gits are manipulating them. They're having fun attacking the spiky chaos boys. That's all that matters. But repeated coordination creates patterns. The orc warboss might notice that whenever his forces move towards certain targets, the metal warriors support them with covering fire. When his boys need to retreat and regroup, the Necrons press forward, taking attention off the greenskins. This isn't altruism, just tactical sense, but the warboss might start to appreciate the efficiency. Over multiple campaigns, this could evolve. The warboss might start actively coordinating with the Necrons, not because he's their ally, but because fighting alongside them produces better results. His mech boys might study Necron positions and movements. A timing orc advances to complement their tactics. He might even meet with the Necron overlord to discuss strategy, not out of formal alliance, but simple practical sense. If the metal git has good ideas about where the best fights are, why not listen? Such relationships would remain fundamentally unstable. The moment the mutual threat disappears, both sides would likely turn on each other. Orcs because they always need enemies to fight. Necrons because they ultimately view orcs as vermin, to be exterminated once useful. But during the period of cooperation, both sides might develop grudging respect. The overlord might acknowledge that these particular greenskins are tactically competent, if primitive. The warboss might admit that the metal gits know how to fight proper and put on a good show. Blood Axe orcs, in particular, would be prone to such arrangements. This clan has a reputation for un-orky behavior, specifically their willingness to learn from other species and adopt successful tactics regardless of their origin. Other orcs view blood axes with suspicion, accusing them of being too clever and not brutal enough. But blood axes are also remarkably successful, their combined cunning and brutality making them formidable opponents. A blood axe war boss encountering Necrons might see them not as simple enemies, but as potential sources of tactical knowledge. Imagine a blood axe war boss studying Necron formations and strategies. He'd notice their discipline, their coordinated movements, their ability to phase in and out of battle. Being blood axe, he'd want to copy what works. He might train his own boys in more disciplined tactics, painting them silver to mimic Necron appearance, even attempting to recreate the intimidation factor of implacable metal warriors advancing in perfect formation. This isn't alliance or friendship, but it is a form of respect, an acknowledgement that the enemy has worthwhile tactics. A Necron overlord might notice this mimicry and find it either offensive or amusing depending on his personality. Zandrek would probably be delighted, seeing it as evidence that the rebellious forces are learning proper military discipline. Trazin might find it fascinating enough to add this particular war boss to his collection. Imhotep, the Stormlord, would likely see it as an opportunity, an orc force that's predictable enough to manipulate effectively. Each response creates different relationship possibilities. There's also the question of mutual enemies creating lasting patterns of coordination. Chaos and Tyranids threaten everyone, including orcs and Necrons. If a particular region of space faces repeated invasions by these forces, the local orcs and Necrons might develop what amounts to an informal understanding. Not alliance, not peace, just a pattern where both sides know that sometimes they'll fight together against the bigger threat. They might still skirmish with each other during quiet periods, but when the real enemies show up, both sides know to focus fire where it matters. This creates something that resembles friendship from a certain perspective, at least by grimdark standards. Regular combat partners who know each other's capabilities, enemies who fought beside each other often enough to develop tactical synergy, commanders who can predict each other's movements through long experience. No formal treaties, no diplomatic relations, just the practical understanding that comes from repeatedly surviving the same battles. Historical parallels from human warfare suggest such relationships are not only possible, but almost inevitable given enough time and shared conflict. Enemy units in WWI and WW2 sometimes developed respect for particular opposing commanders or formations. Warriors from feuding tribes might cooperate against external invaders. Rival gangs might temporarily unite against police pressure. The mechanisms that create these alliances, shared threat and mutual benefit, exist in 40K, just as they exist in human history. The difference in 40,000 is that the species involved are so fundamentally different that any cooperation seems impossible. But given millions of years of conflict, countless battlefields across the galaxy, the sheer statistical probability that somewhere, sometime, the right circumstances would align, it becomes harder to argue that such relationships never happen. Maybe not friendship as humans understand it, maybe not even conscious alliance, but patterns of behavior that result in sustained cooperation and might, by some definitions, qualify as a kind of relationship. Stories from the community. When players create canon official, Warhammer 40,000 lore, published by Games Workshop and Black Library, provides the framework. But the community, the millions of players and fans who engage with the setting, creates infinite variations within that framework. Player-created narratives, army backstories, and community discussions explore possibilities that official canon only hints at. When it comes to unlikely relationships, like Orc-Necron friendships, the community has produced some of the most creative and compelling examples. The tabletop game itself encourages this creativity. Players must justify their army compositions, explain why these particular forces are fighting together. During editions of the game that allowed allied contingents, pairing orcs and necrons on the same side required inventive storytelling. Players rose to the challenge, crafting elaborate backstories for their forces that explained how such impossible alliances came to be. One popular player narrative involves a Necron overlord who, through calculation rather than sentiment, recognizes orcs as useful tools. This overlord, let's call him Zarathek, and awakens to find his tomb world surrounded by hostile forces. His warriors are few, his technology not yet fully functional, but nearby, an orc military action is in progress. A massive greenskin horde tearing through the same enemies that threaten Zarathek's tomb. Instead of fighting them, Zarathek manipulates their advance, using minor interventions to steer the orcs toward his enemies while preserving his own forces. The orc war boss leading this action, Grimskull, notices the metal warriors who sometimes appear to assist his attacks. Being Bloodaxe, he's clever enough to understand tactical coordination when he sees it. Instead of attacking these metal gits, he starts actively coordinating with them, not through formal communication or alliance, and just through reading the battlefield and placing his forces where they'll be most effective. Over time, Grimskull and Zarathek develop an understanding. They never meet face to face. They never acknowledge their cooperation, but both benefit from the arrangement. This narrative allows players to field an orc Necron army while maintaining the essential nature of both species. Neither becomes soft or sentimental. The Necron remains coldly calculating. The orc remains enthusiastically violent. Their cooperation is purely pragmatic, existing only because it produces better results than fighting each other. Yet there's something compelling about two commanders from completely different species learning to work together despite having no common language or shared values beyond tactical effectiveness. Our forum discussions explore theoretical scenarios with great depth. One particularly detailed thread examined what would happen if an orc believed a Necron was actually his best friend. The original poster argued that if enough orcs believed this, their gestalt field might actually make it true in some sense. Dozens of responses debated the mechanics, with some arguing the field can't override fundamental personality. Others suggesting cumulative belief might create at least the appearance of friendship through advantageous coincidences. The debate revealed something interesting about the community. People want these relationships to be possible, not because they want 40,000 to become less grimdark, but because they recognize that in a sufficiently large and old universe, even impossible things eventually happen. The galaxy is vast, and time is long, and consciousness is strange. Given enough opportunities, an orc and a Necron somewhere, somehow, finding common ground becomes not only possible, but inevitable. Fan fiction explores these themes with surprising depth and quality. Some authors write comedic pieces about orcs accidentally befriending Necrons through misunderstanding. Others craft tragic tales about Zandrak, offering an orc war boss genuine respect and kindness, only for that orc to die before understanding what he'd been given. Still others write action-focused stories where orcs and Necrons fight together against mutual threats, developing wordless camaraderie through shared combat. One particularly well-regarded fan story follows a mech boy captured by Trazyn, who becomes the museum's unofficial maintenance engineer. The orc initially tries to escape, but discovers that Trazyn's galleries contain such fascinating technology that staying and studying it is actually more interesting than leaving. Over years or decades, the mech boy becomes integrated into Solemnace's operations, maintaining exhibits and even helping with new acquisitions. He never stops being an orc, still fights when given the opportunity, still builds machines for the joy of building. But he's also developed genuine loyalty to Trazyn and pride in maintaining the galleries. These fan creations aren't just wish fulfillment or subversion of grimdark themes. They're explorations of the setting's possibilities, attempts to understand what these inhuman species might be capable of. The authors think deeply about orc psychology, about what makes them tick and what they might value. They consider Necron personalities, or which lords might be capable of unusual relationships and under what circumstances. The best fan works maintain the essential darkness of the setting while finding moments of unexpected light within it. The range and creativity of these fan works deserves deeper examination. Some authors approach the topic with complete seriousness, treating it as a genuine exploration of consciousness and connection in inhuman contexts. These stories often focus on the tragic aspects, the fundamental loneliness of both species, the barriers that can never fully be overcome, the inevitability of loss when immortal and mortal beings attempt connection. They ask serious questions about what consciousness means, how relationships form across impossible gaps, and whether understanding is possible between beings so fundamentally different. Other authors embrace the inherent absurdity and humor of the situation. These comedic takes often feature orcs who completely misunderstand Necron technology and culture, treating ancient artifacts as particularly killy clubs or attempting to paint Necron warriors green to make them proper orky. The humor comes from the collision of orc straightforward simplicity with Necron complex ancient technology. Yet even these comic pieces often contain moments of genuine emotion, suggestions that beneath the humor lies real connection. Some of the most sophisticated fan works examine the relationship from both perspectives, alternating chapters between an orc and a Necron viewpoint. These stories highlight how differently each species perceives the same events. What the orc sees as a good scrap that he happened to share with a reliable fighting companion, the Necron sees as tactical coordination with a useful but ultimately disposable tool. Yet gradually, through the narrative, both perspectives shift. The orc begins to recognize that his metal companion thinks differently than expected, has his own complex motivations. The Necron starts to perceive the orc as more than simple tool, as a being with his own form of intelligence and perspective. Artists in the community contribute their own interpretations. Fan art depicts orcs and Necrons fighting side by side, sharing quiet moments after battle, or engaged in activities that blend both species' characteristics. Some art leans heavily into the comedy, showing orcs trying to fix Necron bodies with scrap metal or Necrons looking bewildered at orc engineering. Other pieces emphasize the tragic beauty of such impossible partnerships, with composition and color choices highlighting both the connection and the fundamental differences that make that connection so remarkable. The community has developed its own terminology and in-jokes around these relationships. Terms like Orcran friendship, the green and the silver, or when boys meet bots appear in forum discussions. Players reference specific fan works or player narratives that have become well known in community spaces. These shared references create a kind of collaborative mythology, a communal understanding of how such relationships might work and what makes them compelling. And tournament and campaign organizers have sometimes incorporated these themes into their events. Special scenarios where orcs and Necrons must cooperate against overwhelming odds. Campaign rules that reward creative alliance justifications. Painting competitions that specifically request players to create mixed force displays that tell a story. These official community events legitimize and encourage creative exploration of unusual relationships. The community's engagement with this topic also reveals broader patterns about how fans interact with grimdark settings. There's a balance between respecting the darkness and finding light within it. Players and readers don't want to eliminate the grimdark aspects that make 40K compelling. They don't seek to turn it into a cheerful, optimistic universe where everyone gets along. But they also resist the idea that grimdark means nothing but unrelenting misery with no exceptions or variations. This balance manifests in how people discuss these relationships. Community members will argue passionately about whether such friendships are canonically possible, citing lore sources and logical arguments. Yet the same people also write and enjoy stories that push boundaries or outright contradict established facts. There's a recognition that canon and fanon serve different purposes. Canon provides the framework and establishes the rules. Fanon explores possibilities, asks what if, and creates personal meaning within the established framework. The discussion also touches on larger questions about representation and diversity in fiction. Warhammer 40,000's setting is predominantly hostile and violent, with most factions defined by their opposition to others. Finding moments of cooperation and connection becomes a way to explore different types of stories within that framework. It demonstrates that even in a setting built on conflict, there's room for diverse narratives: tragic, comic, hopeful, despairing, or all of these at once. Community platforms facilitate these discussions and creations. Reddit communities dedicated to 40K lore debate the theoretical possibility of various unlikely alliances. Discord servers host collaborative writing projects where multiple authors contribute chapters to shared narratives. YouTube channels analyze community-created lore and fan theories. Podcasts interview authors of popular fan works. This interconnected network of platforms creates a rich ecosystem where ideas spread, evolve, and inspire further creativity. The age range of the community also contributes to diverse perspectives on these relationships. Younger fans who grew up in a more interconnected global culture might be more naturally inclined towards stories of cross-cultural or cross-species understanding. Older fans who followed 40K for decades bring deep lore knowledge and appreciation for how the setting has evolved. Veterans who started with Rogue Trader remember when the setting was less rigidly defined, more open to strange possibilities. Each generation contributes its own perspective and priorities. What unifies these diverse voices is genuine love for the setting and desire to engage with it creatively. Nobody writes elaborate fan fiction about Orc-Necron friendship because they hate Warhammer 40,000 or want to fix it. And they do it because they're fascinated by these species, intrigued by the possibilities, and eager to explore corners of the setting that official canon hasn't fully developed. Their work is a form of creative appreciation, showing deep engagement with source material rather than rejection of it. Community discussions also reveal the meta-appeal of unlikely friendships in 40K. People are drawn to these stories because they represent hope without undermining the setting's core themes. In a universe of endless war, a single friendship doesn't end the war. It doesn't make the galaxy less dangerous or cruel, but it reminds us that consciousness and connection can persist even in the darkest circumstances. That beings from completely incompatible species can still find ways to relate. That maybe, just maybe, there's room for more than hate and violence in this grim future. The community also produces memes and jokes around these concepts, not to mock them, but to celebrate them. Images of orcs and necrons sitting together, sharing drinks that neither can consume, or engaged in friendly competition. These humorous takes don't diminish the serious discussions. They complement them, showing that the community can hold both grimdark seriousness and light-hearted fun in balance. The jokes acknowledge how absurd the idea is, while simultaneously affirming that absurdity is part of what makes 40K great. Player experiences create real narratives through gameplay. When someone's Orc army and Necron army repeatedly face each other across multiple games, when both players know each other's tactics intimately, when they've shared countless battles, those armies develop history together. The players might start inventing details about how their commanders view each other, about recurring vendettas or grudging respect. This collaborative storytelling creates rich narratives that exist solely between those players, but feel as real as any official canon. Tournament play and campaign systems produce similar emergent narratives. A player's Orc army advancing through a campaign map might repeatedly encounter the same Necron force. Both armies might end up fighting alongside each other against different opponents in subsequent rounds. These mechanical coincidences of tournament structure become story opportunities. Players explain why their forces are suddenly allies after being enemies, creating on-the-fly narratives that sometimes prove more memorable than the games themselves. But the community's creative output demonstrates something crucial about Warhammer 40,000. It's a shared universe in the truest sense. Games Workshop provides the framework, but millions of players and fans populate that framework with their own stories, their own interpretations, their own visions of what's possible. An Orc befriending a Necron might never appear in official canon, but it exists in countless player narratives, fan fictions, forum discussions, and meme images. These community creations are as much a part of the 40,000 experience as any Black Library novel. What this says about Warhammer 40,000. The fascination with unlikely friendships in Warhammer 40,000, particularly the idea of an orc befriending a Necron, reveals something profound about the setting and its appeal. On the surface, 40K is pure grimdark, endless war, a cosmic horror, civilizations built on suffering and oppression. Yet within this darkness, the community consistently seeks and creates moments of connection, understanding, and even joy. This paradox isn't a contradiction or a subversion of the setting's themes. It's an essential part of what makes Warhammer 40,000 endure. Human nature craves connection. Even in fictional universes designed to be maximally hostile, we look for relationships and meaning. We want characters to form bonds, to find others who understand them, to experience something beyond constant struggle. This desire doesn't weaken when the setting is grimdark. If anything, it intensifies. Connections become more precious when they're rare. Understanding becomes more valuable when it's hard-won. Friendship matters more when the entire universe seems designed to prevent it. The specific appeal of Orc-Necron friendship stems from how unlikely it is. These species are opposite in almost every way. Living versus undead, organic versus mechanical, chaotic versus ordered, created to fight each other in the galaxy's most ancient war. Their friendship shouldn't be possible, which makes the possibility compelling. It represents the ultimate triumph of consciousness and connection over circumstance and programming. If an orc and a Necron can befriend each other, maybe connection is possible anywhere, under any circumstances. This theme resonates because it mirrors human experience. We form friendships across vast differences in background, belief, and circumstance. We connect with people who seem initially incompatible with us. We find common ground in unexpected places. The Orc and Necron friendship, as impossible as it seems, reflects something true about how relationships actually work. They don't require identical backgrounds or compatible natures. They require only recognition, respect, and repeated interaction under circumstances that allow connection to form. The grimdark setting actually makes these moments more powerful, not less. If 40,000 were a setting of easy peace and universal cooperation, an orc befriending a Necron would be unremarkable. But because the setting is built on conflict and isolation, because species are designed to hate each other, because the entire galaxy seems determined to prevent understanding, any moment of genuine connection becomes extraordinary. It's not that we want to make 40,000 less dark. We want to find light within that darkness. We need to prove that even the grim darkest setting can't completely extinguish the possibility of friendship. There's also something appealing about characters who break their species molds. Zandrek is interesting because he's not like other Necrons. His madness allows him to be honorable, kind even, in ways his saner peers cannot manage. An orc clever enough to recognize worth in a Necron is remarkable precisely because most orcs wouldn't. These exceptional individuals show that species-wide traits are tendencies rather than absolutes, that personality and circumstance can override genetic programming or cultural conditioning. This ties into broader themes about consciousness and identity. What makes us who we are? Are we defined by our species, our programming, our biological imperatives? Or can we transcend these limitations through choice and awareness? A Necron who forms a genuine relationship despite having no soul. An orc who develops loyalty to a being. His species was literally designed to fight. These examples suggest consciousness is more flexible and more powerful than materialism would suggest. They argue for the persistence of self and choice even in circumstances that should eliminate both. The tragedy underlying impossible friendships enhances rather than diminishes their appeal. An orc's lifespan is long by human standards, but nothing compared to a Necron's effective immortality. Any relationship between them is temporary from the Necron's perspective, another brief connection that will end while he continues. This echo of mortality and loss makes the relationship more poignant. Or Zandrek treating an orc war boss with respect and kindness. Knowing that Warboss will die in mere decades, while Zandrek endures for millennia, that's genuinely sad while being beautiful. Similarly, the fundamental differences between species ensure these relationships can never be simple or comfortable. An orc can never fully understand what a Necron has lost. A Necron can never experience an orc's simple joy in combat. Their connection must bridge not just cultural differences, but fundamental gaps in consciousness and experience. This difficulty makes any success more impressive. They're not just overcoming dislike or unfamiliarity, they're forging connection across barriers that should be insurmountable. The community's engagement with these themes shows healthy fandom interaction with challenging material. Rather than rejecting the grimdark elements or trying to sanitize them, fans lean into the darkness while finding human moments within it. They acknowledge that 40,000 is a horror setting, while insisting there's room for more than horror. They take seriously the stated impossibility of cooperation, while creatively exploring how it might happen anyway. This balance between respecting canon and expanding it, between accepting grimdark premises and finding exceptions, demonstrates mature engagement with fiction. It also reveals 40K's flexibility as a setting. Games Workshop provides baseline lore, but they've always left room for player interpretation and creativity. The galaxy is so vast, time is so long, that individual exceptions to general rules become not just possible but inevitable. Our official canon can say these species always fight, while leaving space for individual stories where specific characters don't. This tension between general rules and specific exceptions makes the setting rich and adaptable. The idea of an orc befriending a Necron thus becomes emblematic of everything that makes Warhammer 40,000 compelling. It takes the setting seriously enough to understand why it shouldn't happen. It respects the lore deeply enough to work within established rules. But it also recognizes that consciousness is strange, relationships are complex, and in a universe this large and old, any non-contradictory possibility eventually becomes reality somewhere. It's grimdark meeting hope, despair meeting joy, isolation meeting connection. It's Warhammer 40,000 being exactly what it should be, dark enough to matter, flexible enough to surprise, and human enough to care about. Closing thoughts. So we return to where we began, the impossible friendship between an orc and a Necron, two species that should never find common ground. Throughout this exploration, we've examined these species from every angle. We've understood the orc's brutal simplicity, their gestalt psychic power, their capacity for loyalty and respect. We've confronted the tragedy of Necron existence, their prison of living metal, their lost souls and retained consciousness. We've met Zandrek, the mad overlord who sees friends where others see enemies. We've encountered Trazyn, the collector who appreciates all forms of life and consciousness. We've explored scenarios where necessity creates cooperation, where repeated interaction builds familiarity, as where exceptional individuals transcend their species' limitations. The evidence suggests that while such friendships remain extraordinarily rare, they're not absolutely impossible. The right orc, under the right circumstances, encountering the right Necron, with sufficient time and shared experience, might develop something that resembles friendship by at least some definitions. It wouldn't look like human friendship. It wouldn't be based on emotional intimacy or deep personal understanding. But it could be real in its own way, built on respect and shared combat experience, sustained by practical benefits and mutual appreciation, made possible by the strange realities of a universe where belief shapes matter and consciousness persists in metal. What makes this possibility compelling isn't that it would fundamentally change either species or alter the nature of the setting. One friendship doesn't end the eternal war. It doesn't make the galaxy less dark or less dangerous, but it represents something essential about consciousness and connection. The persistent ability to reach across barriers that should be impassable, to recognize worth in unlikely places, to form relationships that defy all reasonable expectations. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, perhaps that's enough. Perhaps in a universe designed for isolation and conflict, the mere possibility of an orc and a Necron standing side by side, fighting together against mutual enemies, acknowledging each other as something more than targets to be destroyed, represents a kind of victory. Not over the darkness itself, which remains as vast and cold as ever, but over the assumption that darkness is all there is, that connection is impossible, that we are nothing more than our programming or our species' baseline characteristics. The story of the orc who befriended a Necron exists in the spaces between established canon and pure speculation, in the realm of might have been and could be. It lives in player narratives and fan fiction, in forum debates and community memes, in the imagination of everyone who's looked at these two impossible species and wondered, what if? It's a story that acknowledges how grimdark the setting is, while insisting there's room for more than grimness and darkness. It respects the lore while expanding its possibilities. It takes seriously the idea that even in hell, even in eternal war, and even in the 41st millennium, consciousness finds ways to connect. If you've enjoyed this journey through one of Warhammer 40,000's most unlikely possibilities, consider subscribing to the channel for more explorations of the dark future. Share this video with friends who might appreciate the idea of finding light in grimdark places. And remember, in a universe this vast and old and strange, nothing that's theoretically possible remains forever impossible. Somewhere, sometime, an orc and a Necron might share a moment of understanding. And that possibility, however remote, makes the galaxy a more interesting place. For the Emperor's servants, for the tomb world's ancient inhabitants, for the endless green tide across the stars, and for all of us who look into the darkness and find stories worth telling, thank you for watching. What the war continues, as it always has and always will. But in that eternal conflict, we found a moment to imagine something different, something that shouldn't be, but might be, something that represents hope without denying horror. And that, perhaps, is enough. Until next time, may your battles be interesting, your stories compelling, and your friendships, however unlikely, genuine and true.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.